What happened in episode 5 of the final season of Game of Thrones, and why? Hi everyone, this is Robert. Welcome to Deep Geek. If you want regular insight and intelligent debate about Game of Thrones and more, then click on the subscribe button in the bottom right hand corner of the screen. Before we get into the details of this episode, I think it's worth talking first briefly about its overarching thematic role within this narrative. Director Miguel Sapochnik has said that he views episodes 3 to 5 of this season as one long act or episode. I think what he meant by that was that episode 3 was all about the battle against the destructive forces of ice, and this episode was about the destructive forces of fire, with episode 4 acting as the hinge between the two. A Song of Ice and Fire has always had as one of its key themes the concept that ice and fire are equal and opposite forces, both of which could destroy the world. It isn't a matter of good fire versus bad ice. Both are potentially horrifically dangerous. So what we have here is a deliberately shocking reminder that fire and dragons are potentially just as dangerous to humanity as the ice of the Army of the Dead. Episode 6, I predict, will be about achieving the balance once more. Ice has been dealt with, so fire will also have to be pushed back somehow, for the protection of humanity. But let's dig into this episode a bit more. We open with Varys. He has been openly plotting against Daenerys and gets what he must have expected to happen to him. It's the fulfillment of a couple of bits of foreshadowing from last season. Dany told him that she would kill him if he ever betrayed her, and Melisandre told him last season that he, like her, would die in Westeros. He is the last of the old ruling elite from the start of Season 1, the only surviving member of that original small council, so we shouldn't be too surprised. He is the last vestige of that old world that has to be figuratively swept away to make room for whatever comes next. What we should be aware of, though, is that he was in the process of writing letters to various people before he was killed. We didn't see to who, or whether he managed to get any away, but there's probably now a very good chance that others also know about Jon's parentage. It seems that Varys had nearly 2 weeks to try to organise something. I think we can therefore expect a concerted effort from some to get him onto the throne. I'm sure he won't want to, but that won't stop anyone trying. We should also note that Dany's reading of the situation is that she blames everyone for betraying her. Jon, Sansa, Tyrion, Varys. She feels alone in this. And she puts Tyrion on a final warning after he once more decides to tell her that he misjudged something rather than admit to anything approaching treason. And of course, Tyrion immediately goes out and does something that Dany would view as treasonous. We can expect to see him face up to the consequences of this in the next episode. But here Tyrion hatches a plan, and it's a plan based on his desire to save the people of King's Landing, and his fear that Dany may just burn everything anyway. It's to make sure that everybody knows that when the bells of King's Landing ring, it means that the defenders have surrendered. He makes sure that Daenerys knows it, and Grey Worm, and Jon, and he gets Jaime to go and extract Cersei and make sure the bells do ring. The bells ringing should be the thing that makes Dany stop and call off Drogon. Tyrion is once more trying to manage Dany. We can understand why here, but still he's moved away from advising her and into trying to control her. Let us be in no doubt, Tyrion knows full well that what he is doing here will get him killed. I had wondered whether Jaime might sacrifice his life to save the city as he sacrificed his reputation to do the same years earlier, but it is Tyrion who does. If his plans work and innocent civilians are spared, Daenerys will kill him for releasing Jaime, and the innocent civilians will never know what he did. It would actually be the second time that he has saved them from the threat of an invading force, and the second time he's got no credit for it. The irony is, of course, that Tyrion's plan is based on the fear that Dany might burn them all, and the hope that she won't if she's given a reason not to. It is a forlorn hope, but again, we're getting ahead of ourselves. With a couple of weeks to think about it, Daenerys' plan of attack seems a good one, even if she seemingly doesn't want to share it with her generals. She utilises one of Aegon I's, Aegon the Conqueror's, old tricks of flying up high, then dive-bombing down out of the sun's glare. It's effective and the Iron Fleet are destroyed in no time. And then the city defences are destroyed. The gate, the scorpions, the walls, the Golden Company, hired at such great expense, turn out to be, well, not very effective. And for the first part of the battle, this all seems to go to plan. The defenders are routed, victory is assured, and the cry goes up for the bells to ring the city's surrender. The people, of course, didn't need Cersei's order to do it, so it doesn't matter that Jaime hasn't made it into the Red Keep yet. The Lannister soldiers drop their weapons in the streets, and that should have been that. But then Daenerys decides otherwise. This, of course, was the climactic moment in the episode, and for her as a character, it had been made clear that she was going to have that moment, to make the decision herself, away from her advisors, about whether to burn them all. And her decision was a shocking one, because the people had surrendered. There was no pretense of her trying to get Cersei out by focusing on the Red Keep. She literally just roved over the city, burning innocent people to a crisp in their thousands. There is no getting around how horrific this is, or any way to try to justify it. The showrunners have clearly been trying to show us Cersei and Daenerys as sort of mirrors for each other. 3 children, or 3 dragons. Dany's "all right then, let it be fear," echoing Cersei's earlier "I choose violence." Their beliefs that their loves, Jaime and Jon, have betrayed them, and so on. Dany at least is given a justificatory speech in which she talks about destroying King's Landing and killing Cersei as being a service to future generations. I'll leave you to decide whether that particular argument holds any water. But in terms of understanding why Daenerys did it, Emilia Clarke herself talks about it being grief for her lost dragons, her friends, her confidants, her lost loves, and pain boiling over into anger, and she does nothing to choke it back. Whether we understand or sympathise with that or not, we can't pretend that this turn hasn't been hinted at for years in the show, even leaving aside all the references to her father as being the Mad King and about Targaryen madness more generally. Daenerys has been talking about and threatening to burn cities to the ground for 7 seasons now. Outside Qarth in Season 2, she shouted at the rulers of the city that when her dragons were grown, she would burn cities to the ground, starting with theirs. In Meereen, to Hizdahr, she said that she would be willing to return his city to the dirt. Then later to Tyrion, she tells him her plan is to destroy the cities of Yunkai, Astapor and Volantis. Tyrion talks her out of that one. Tyrion also tried many times last season and this to talk her out of burning King's Landing. All of his crazy plans of the last few seasons, the attack on Casterly Rock, the Dragon Pit Summit and so on, were him trying to come up with alternatives to Dany just flying over to King's Landing and burning it, as she said she wanted to. This doesn't come out of the blue. In simple terms, Daenerys has quite literally been telling us for years that left to her own devices, she would burn King's Landing to the ground. And left to her own devices, and in a place of great grief and anger, that's exactly what she did. And when she did it, the reaction on the ground was immediate. Grey Worm killed one of the soldiers who had surrendered just moments before, and the Unsullied and Dothraki and Northerners all just charged further into the city, raping and pillaging. Like in the sack of King's Landing we heard about in Robert's Rebellion years earlier. Just that this time it was the Lannisters on the receiving end. War makes monsters of us all. The characters we know in the midst of this react as you might expect them to. Davos took the time to try to save a few innocents from what was going on. Incidentally, we saw a few seasons ago how he reacted to the burning alive of just one child, Shireen. I think we can guess what his reaction will be to this. Jon sees everything he must have feared play out in front of him, and for him, his pain will have been doubled by knowing that this is all being done by someone he loves. His calling on his troops to fall back was a pragmatic withdrawal in the circumstances, not an abdication of responsibility. He will be at the forefront of the action next episode, and how he reacts to Dany then will be a crucial part of the final twists. And behind them all, Tyrion walked softly and sadly through the wreckage of the battle, as he walked through the wreckage of the Battle of the Field of Fire last season. He tried to stop this, and he failed. The directorial approach in the second half of the episode is definitely worth noting, because it's trying to tell us something. The camera focuses in on Dany as she is making her decision to pursue fire and blood. The trigger for her decision, incidentally, appears not to be the bells per se, but a proper site of the Red Keep, built by her ancestors, still in the control of Cersei. But after Dany has made her decision, we don't see her again. Just a ground view of Drogon swooping and soaring, breathing death across the streets. We are being shown that the important thing here is not the impact of her decision on her, but on the tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands below. So, for all that follows, Dany and Drogon are largely just the backdrop, the faceless creators of carnage. The characters in the city who we are now being shown have to evade the dragonfire and falling masonry and so on. It is indiscriminate, something they can't control. It doesn't matter to them who is causing it. What matters is just survival. So let's pick up on a couple of these characters, Sandor and Arya. They make it to the Red Keep and their objectives seem clear. The Hound wants to kill the Mountain and Arya wants to kill Cersei. But then we have a really quite touching scene that I think will prove to be an extremely important moment in the closing of Arya's arc. Sandor stops and says to her that he has been wanting revenge his whole life. Does she want to end up like him? Perhaps he is just trying to get her to turn back, to protect her from what will surely be a tough fight ahead, but I think there's more here. He actually genuinely cares about her in his own gruff way, and he doesn't want her to live a life like his, to be like him. When she turns back, it isn't just her deciding to take his advice, it's her letting go of the final names on her list. She is giving up this hatred and desire for vengeance that has been what has driven her right through from the end of Season 1. This season has shown us Arya returning more to being normal, caring, not just the emotionless assassin she had trained to be, and now she doesn't just try to escape King's Landing, she tries to save lives. She fails because Drogon, but the intention here is important. Her focus now is less on killing people or self-survival, and more on saving other people. The horse which randomly shows up to get her away is symbolic of this, I think. Like her, it is bloodied and bruised and covered in dirt, but underneath it is pure white. At least, I think that is the symbolism they were going for. The bigger point is that amidst all these people choosing death and vengeance and anger, Arya, the person we know as most synonymous with death and killing, chooses life and hope. Sandor doesn't. He grimly sticks to his desire to get vengeance for something that happened to him as a child. Like a couple of others in this episode, he just can't break from this thing that's been driving him for so long, even though it means his doom. There's lots we could say about the moment when he comes face to face with his brother, Cersei and Qyburn. The way the Mountain casually kills Qyburn could have had a lot of Frankenstein's monster turning on its creator symbolism, but it seems that the Mountain couldn't really care less about Qyburn. He was focused on Sandor, which means that all our assumptions that the Mountain was now some kind of unthinking zombie wight were wrong. He clearly still had memories and emotions left over from his life before Qyburn brought him back. Anyway, Cersei tiptoes away, and we are left with the confrontation we have been expecting since we first saw the two brothers together in Season 1, and it largely ends as we might expect it to. The way to kill the zombie Mountain was always going to be fire, and there was plenty of that around. Sandor couldn't kill him the way he would usually kill someone, by stabbing them, so he finally faced up to his fear of fire, and his story ended as a mirror to how it had begun. As a child, Gregor had pushed Sandor into fire, scarring him. At the end, Sandor pushed Gregor into fire. The other person making their way into the Red Keep was Jaime. He had to go on a slightly circuitous route, which brought him up against Euron. The fight here is a little contrived, to be honest. Euron's closing cry that he was the man who killed Jaime Lannister hadn't really been set up for us. We'd not been told that this was a particular aim of his. And if he is dead, then this does seem to rob Yara of the chance to have a final reckoning with him. But anyway, it makes no difference. Euron didn't kill Jaime Lannister. Falling Masonry did that. Because Jaime did find Cersei, and he tried to get her out in the way that Tyrion had set up for him, but he couldn't because of the rubble. Jaime's character arc here is, it has to be said, quite troubling. He had been on a long trail of redemption, finally coming to accept who he was and what he had done, and embracing his feelings for Brienne. It seems, though, that in that understanding of who he was, he came to an understanding that he was bound to Cersei, with stronger ties than he had thought. It's all rather tragic. We did at least get the answers to a couple of the questions that have been nagging us for a while about Cersei. She was pregnant, it would appear, with Jaime's baby, so her saying it was Euron's was just her pretending. And the Valonqar prophecy, a book prophecy about who would kill her and how, turned out to be a complete misdirect. It was omitted from the show version of Maggie the Frog's prophecy, to be fair, but it's more evidence that the show has largely ignored the prophecies. Azor Ahai, the prince that was promised, the Valonqar, and so on, in its ending. Perhaps this is a reflection of George R.R. Martin's own clear emphasis on prophecies being not the kind of thing you can rely on. What matters more is how people react to them, and how that drives the action. So, as the episode ends, Daenerys is victorious. Everyone in Team Cersei is dead, but almost everyone who had been part of that great alliance, surviving Dothraki and Unsullied aside, will now be horrified at what Dany had done. The question is, what will they do about it? I'll leave you with one final thought, though. It looked last time as if Bran was taking a step back in all this, telling Tyrion that he was mostly in the past these days, didn't really want anything, and leaving it up to Jon to decide whether to tell Sansa and Arya about his true identity. He clearly didn't appear in this episode, unless he was walking into that horse that Arya found, of course, but we had a brief reminder that Bran has seen all this before. He knew that what happened in this episode was going to happen. The image that we saw of Drogon's shadow passing over King's Landing was in that set of visions that Bran saw a couple of seasons ago as he was being dragged out of Bloodraven's cave. Bran knew what Daenerys was going to do, and he told no one, and did nothing to stop it. Why? Please join me for live streams on Thursdays and Sundays all through the season, where I'll be discussing this episode and Game of Thrones more widely with special guests. If you'd like to see more of my Game of Thrones Season 8 videos, please click on this link on the left of the screen. Or if you'd like to support the channel, or get some exclusive content or priority access on my live streams, please click on the link to my Patreon page on the right of the screen. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you again soon.